The first time Karen showed up at my front gate, she wasn't smiling. She was squinting through her oversized sunglasses like a hawk sizing up prey, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into a line so thin it could cut glass. "You can't live here," she declared, her voice slicing through the quiet afternoon, sending a chill through the still air that hovered over my newly built home like a threat. I remember setting down my toolbox and blinking, half thinking I misheard her. I had just finished tightening the bolts on my porch railing. Proud of what I'd built on the 10 acres my father left me, a piece of land surrounded by pine trees and golden fields, untouched by any neighborhood covenants or community rules. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" I asked, wiping sweat off my brow. Karen adjusted her sunglasses, glanced at her clipboard, and repeated, slower this time, as if explaining it to a child. "This property falls under our homeowners association. You can't just move in without HOA approval." The audacity in her tone hit me like a slap. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ma'am, this land isn't even in your HOA, I said, reaching for the survey map that I kept rolled up inside the front door. But Karen was already snapping photos with her phone, walking along my driveway like she owned the place. "We'll see what the board says," she muttered. That was the beginning, the spark that would ignite a war I never wanted, a conflict that would drag police, county officials, and half the neighborhood into a firestorm of lies, power, and revenge. Within days, I realized Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a self-appointed queen of control, and she'd made it her mission to drive me out by any means necessary. The next morning, I woke to find an envelope taped to my gate. Notice of violation. It was printed with the HOA's letterhead, though I wasn't a member, and claimed I owed $200 in unauthorized structure fines. I stared at it, dumbfounded. The house wasn't unauthorized. It was built legally, inspected, approved, and recorded by the county. Still, the notice was signed by HOA President Karen Bell, and the threat underneath was clear. Failure to comply may result in legal action and removal of property. I drove straight to the county office where the clerk, a soft-spoken man named Thomas, confirmed what I already knew. "You're not part of any HOA," he said. "That subdivision line ends 2 parcels north of you." He even printed out the official zoning map, stamped with the county seal, just to make sure there was no mistake. Armed with proof, I returned home, ready to shut this nonsense down. But Karen was already there, waiting by the fence with 2 other board members, an older man with a golf visor and a woman holding a binder thicker than a Bible. "I spoke to the county," I said, holding up the documents. "You have no authority here." Karen crossed her arms. "We'll see about that," she said with a smirk. Then turning to the others, she added, "Document the non-compliance." The older man raised his phone and started filming me. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was harassment. I told them to leave, but Karen leaned in close, her perfume sickly sweet, and whispered, "Everyone who's tried to defy me here eventually left. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That night, floodlights flashed across my yard. I ran outside, barefoot, to find 2 strangers installing a HOA private road sign at the end of my driveway. My stomach turned. They were trespassing, putting up signs to make it look like my property was under their control. I yelled for them to stop, but one of them just muttered, "We're acting under HOA orders." When I threatened to call the sheriff, they laughed, until they saw my phone camera recording. They scrambled back into their truck and sped off, the sign half buried in the gravel. I thought that would end it. I was wrong. The following morning, a county officer knocked on my door. Karen had called the cops claiming I was illegally occupying restricted land. My hands trembled as I handed the officer the zoning documents, explaining the situation. He nodded, clearly annoyed at having been dragged into something so petty. "You're right," he said. "They have no jurisdiction here, but you might want to keep an eye out. She's the kind who doesn't let go." He wasn't kidding. Over the next week, Karen's harassment escalated from petty fines to outright sabotage. My mail went missing. My garbage wasn't picked up. HOA volunteers parked their golf carts across the road to check for violations. Every time I confronted them, They smiled that smug, soulless smile and said, "We're just following HOA protocol." But Karen's biggest mistake came when she filed a fraudulent complaint with the county, claiming my septic system was leaking into the neighborhood drainage. That triggered a county inspection, and when the inspector showed up, I showed him my property line markers, proving the drain was nowhere near HOA land. He laughed. "They're really grasping at straws," he said, shaking his head. But when he left, Karen appeared again, standing by her SUV with her arms crossed. "You think you're smarter than the board?" she hissed. "You're going to regret this." That's when I realized she wasn't just power-hungry, she was obsessed. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control, dominance, and ego. She wanted me gone because she couldn't stand that someone existed outside her authority, and she was willing to break the law to prove she still ruled here. That night, someone spray-painted outsider across my front gate. The security camera caught a glimpse of the culprit, a woman in a hoodie roughly Karen's height. I took the footage to the sheriff's office, and they promised to look into it. The next day, Karen was on my porch again, smiling sweetly. "I heard someone vandalized your gate," she said, feigning concern. "It's such a shame when people don't respect community standards." I stared at her, every word boiling inside me, and said, "You need to stop." She tilted her head, smirked, and said, "Or what?" That's when I decided to fight back. I hired a land attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Denise, who specialized in property boundary disputes. She reviewed my documents, the harassment logs, and the police reports, and within days, she drafted a cease and desist letter addressed directly to the HOA. But Karen was unfazed. Instead of backing down, she escalated, organizing a community petition to have me removed for non-compliance. Flyers with my face on them appeared in nearby mailboxes, branding me a troublemaker. When Denise sent a legal notice warning of defamation charges, Karen went ballistic. She stormed onto my property screaming, "You're not one of us! You don't belong here!" I caught it all on camera. The next morning, I filed for a restraining order. That was the breaking point, or so I thought. But Karen wasn't done yet. A week later, I returned home from work to find a "for sale" sign planted in my front yard, nailed to my fence. My heart dropped. She was trying to make it look like I was leaving. A small detail, but the kind of psychological warfare she excelled at. I ripped the sign down and burned it in the fire pit, but the message was clear. She wanted me broken, humiliated, and gone. Days later, things took a darker turn. My security cameras caught headlights pulling up to my gate at 2 a.m. A truck idled there for a minute, then reversed and drove off. In the morning, I found tire tracks leading into my field and footprints near the shed. Inside, someone had cut the fuel line on my generator. My hands shook as I looked around, realizing this was no longer petty harassment. It was sabotage. I reported it to the sheriff again, and this time they took it seriously. "You need to stay cautious," the deputy warned. "If she's doing this or encouraging it, we'll find out." That afternoon, Karen appeared again, acting like nothing was wrong. "You're making quite the impression around here," she said with a grin. "People talk." I stared at her, the rage in my chest coiling tight. "You've made a huge mistake," I said quietly. "I'm done playing." That night, I gathered every document, every photo, every recording, and drove to the county records office. With Denise's help, we filed a formal complaint for harassment, property interference, and defamation. What I didn't know was that Karen had already made her next move. She had called the cops again, this time claiming I was threatening the HOA board. When the police came knocking the next morning, my heart stopped. The lead officer sighed, clearly weary of the endless complaints. "We just need to clear things up," he said. "She's saying you threatened her life." I nearly laughed at the absurdity. "Check the footage," I said. "She's the one trespassing and screaming on my property." The officer reviewed the footage, frowned, and finally muttered, "Looks like she's in deep trouble." That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, a new kind of silence settled over my land, a tense, waiting stillness. My security cameras blinked red in the dark, scanning for movement. Every shadow looked like her. Every sound made my pulse race. I'd won the legal ground, but Karen wasn't the type to lose gracefully. Around midnight, I heard something, a soft crunch of gravel, a faint metallic click near the gate. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch, my heart pounding. The beam cut through the night, landing on a figure standing just beyond the fence. Karen. Her hair was wild, her eyes glinting with fury in the flashlight's glare. "You think you can ruin me?" she whispered, voice trembling with rage. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Before I could respond, she pulled something from her pocket, a folded paper, and held it up. "This," she said, her voice cracking, "changes everything." I squinted at the paper through the beam. It looked like a legal document, stamped, signed, and bearing my property address. "What is that?" I demanded. Karen smiled, cold and triumphant. "It's the new boundary map," she said softly. "And according to this, your land is part of my HOA now." My breath caught. That couldn't be true. "That's impossible," I said. "You can't just change county lines." She tilted her head and whispered, "Watch me." Then she dropped the paper at my gate and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing there under the flickering light, the sound of crickets swallowed by the dread that settled in my chest. The war wasn't over, it was only beginning. The next morning, I barely slept. Karen's words echoed through my mind like a curse. "Your land is part of my HOA now." I sat at the kitchen table, the forged boundary document spread before me, my coffee going cold as I traced every line, every seal, every signature. It looked disturbingly real. The county insignia was embossed, the signatures of two officials I actually recognized were printed, and the coordinates had been slightly adjusted, just enough to include my property within the HOA perimeter. It was a masterpiece of fraud. I called Denise immediately, my voice trembling with anger. She showed up within the hour, scanned the paper, and frowned. "This isn't just fake," she said. "This was printed using official formatting. Someone on the inside helped her." That was the moment the story shifted from neighborhood dispute to a full-blown conspiracy. Denise drove with me to the county registrar's office again, and the clerk, Thomas, looked horrified when he saw the map. "We never approved this," he said, typing furiously into his system. "But it looks like someone logged in under my supervisor's account last night." He paled. "I'll have to report this." Within minutes, county investigators were alerted, and an internal audit began. Karen had crossed a line that could lead to criminal charges. But when I got home, she was already there, standing near my gate with 2 HOA officers and a sheriff's deputy who looked uneasy. "We're here to enforce community compliance," she said with that venomous smirk. I held up the forged map. "You forged a county document," I snapped. The deputy looked between us, unsure. "Ma'am," he said to her, "we'll need to verify this before taking any action." Karen's smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, officer," she said sweetly. "Just doing my duty." She turned to me and whispered, "Enjoy it while it lasts." That night, my driveway filled with headlights, HOA members parked like a mob. They stood by the gate, murmuring among themselves, holding cameras and recording as if preparing to document my removal. I watched from inside, fury boiling through me. Denise told me to stay calm and let the investigation play out, but calm was no longer an option. I installed more security cameras, floodlights, even motion alarms. Each night felt like a siege. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the local newspaper arrived with a front-page story. HOA expands boundaries to include unauthorized property. The article quoted Karen directly, claiming I had illegally built a structure on communal land. My name was printed there, my address too. Denise called immediately. "They're defaming you publicly now. We're filing for an injunction." But I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was one step ahead, always ready, always confident. A few days later, I learned why. One of the county zoning officers, the same one whose signature was on the forged document, suddenly resigned. When pressed by investigators, he claimed he wasn't aware of any fraud. But Thomas found something. Hidden. Log-in timestamps showing Karen's access to county records through a borrowed terminal. She had bribed him. When we confronted the county board, they were furious, but bureaucracy moved slowly. Karen, however, moved fast. She doubled down, filing a community nuisance claim against me, listing every minor detail, my security cameras, my floodlights, even my dog, as disruptive elements. It was harassment layered on harassment, a web of pressure designed to break me mentally and financially. And yet, amid all the chaos, something unexpected happened. A quiet knock on my door one evening revealed a familiar face, the man in the golf visor, one of the HOA board members who had filmed me weeks ago. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before stepping inside. "I shouldn't be here," he said, "but you need to know. Karen's not doing this alone. She's got someone funding her legal moves." My stomach dropped. "Who?" I asked. He hesitated, then whispered, "Her husband's brother. He's a county supervisor. He's the one who approved her bogus map entry." It all clicked then. The fake document, the confidence, the newspaper leak. This wasn't just Karen's crusade. It was a coordinated scheme backed by someone with real political power. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He sighed. "Because she's going to get people hurt. She's planning something big for this weekend, some kind of HOA community inspection. She said if you don't comply, she'll call the cops again." I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. A setup, a confrontation designed to push me into reacting violently so she could claim victimhood. "Thank you," I said. "You did the right thing." He nodded, but his eyes were filled with fear. "If she finds out I told you, I'm finished." When he left, I locked every door, every window, and sat in the dark, listening to the night sounds, the wind through the pines, the faint hum of my generator, the occasional creak of the house. Every noise felt loaded, every silence suspicious. Saturday came, and with it, the so-called inspection. A convoy of HOA members rolled down the road, led by Karen in her white SUV, hazard lights flashing like she was part of a motorcade. They parked in front of my gate, blocking the road, and started unloading clipboards, tape measures, and cameras. I stepped outside, phone in hand, recording every second. "You're trespassing," I said loudly. Karen smiled like a wolf. "We're inspecting community property." "This isn't your community property," I shot back. "You forged documents. The county's already investigating you." She turned to the group behind her, all wide-eyed and whispering, and said dramatically, "See how hostile he is? This is exactly what I've been warning you about." Then, as if on cue, a police car pulled up behind them, called, no doubt, by Karen herself. "Officer," she said, pointing at me, "this man has been threatening the board and refuses to comply with community standards." I handed the officer my folder of evidence, every document, every county letter, even an email from the investigator confirming the forgery. The officer reviewed it silently, then stepped back, radioed something in, and finally turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, "you're under investigation for falsifying legal documents. I suggest you and your board leave before we escalate this further." Her face drained of color. "You can't do this," she hissed. "I am the board." But for the first time, her authority cracked. The mob dispersed, murmuring, confused and uneasy. Karen got into her SUV and drove off, tires screeching. I thought maybe, finally, it was over. But I underestimated her obsession. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed at midnight. A text message from an unknown number. "You should have left when you had the chance." My stomach clenched. I ran to check the cameras. One feed was down, the one facing the backyard. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out cautiously, the beam cutting through fog. The air was thick with silence. Then, a faint flicker caught my eye near the shed. A small fire. I sprinted toward it, shouting, and saw the edge of a gasoline can lying on its side. Someone had tried to set my property ablaze. I managed to extinguish the flames before they spread, my hands shaking. I called the sheriff immediately. When they arrived, they found tire tracks again. Same pattern as before. The deputy's expression was grim. "We'll patrol the area," he said. "But if she's doing this, she's getting desperate." The next morning, I found Karen on her porch across the field, sipping coffee like nothing had happened, watching me. I held her gaze, feeling a cold, heavy certainty settle in my chest. This woman wouldn't stop until one of us was destroyed. I needed to go beyond lawyers, beyond county officials. I needed to expose her completely. So I started digging. Over the next week, I filed public records requests, interviewed neighbors who had left the HOA in disgust, and found a trail of corruption spanning years. Karen had bullied residents into donations for neighborhood projects that never existed. She'd forced elderly homeowners to pay maintenance fees on land she didn't maintain. One man even lost his home after she reported him for violations that turned out to be fake. When I presented this evidence to Denise, her eyes lit up with fierce determination. "This isn't just harassment anymore," she said. "This is racketeering." Together, we compiled a report for the state attorney general's office. But before it could be filed, Karen struck again, this time in a way that made my blood run cold. I came home one evening to find my house door wide open. Nothing was stolen, but everything was moved. Drawers pulled out, photos scattered, personal files on the floor. A single message was carved into my dining table with a knife. "Leave." That was the night I realized Karen wasn't just power-crazed, she was dangerous. I set up hidden cameras inside the house, reinforced every lock, and started carrying a firearm legally registered for protection. The next day, I received a call from Thomas, the county clerk. "You need to come here," he said, his voice tense. When I arrived, he showed me something shocking. Karen had filed a lawsuit against me for defamation and harassment. It was an insane reversal of reality. "Don't worry," Denise assured me. "She's grasping at straws. We'll counter with evidence." But then, another twist. Karen's brother-in-law, the county supervisor, had temporarily suspended the internal investigation into the forged map, citing procedural review. She'd used her connections to freeze the case. We were stuck. Denise bit her lip, thinking. "We'll go federal," she said. "They can't interfere with that." And that's what we did. We sent everything, documents, witness statements, video evidence, to the FBI's local office, citing potential forgery, extortion, and corruption. Days later, an agent called back, confirming they were reviewing the materials. Meanwhile, Karen's arrogance returned. She strutted around the neighborhood again, holding impromptu HOA meetings on the sidewalk, spinning the narrative that I was a criminal trying to undermine community order. Some residents avoided me. Others nodded silently in support. The town felt divided, like a battlefield with invisible lines drawn through every yard. Then came the breaking point. One rainy night, as thunder rolled over the valley, I heard a crash outside. The motion alarm screamed. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the gate. The sight froze me in place. My truck was on fire. Flames roared up from under the hood, rain sizzling on the metal. I ran for the extinguisher, shouting for help. But by the time I doused the flames, the front of the truck was destroyed. The deputies arrived again, weary and angry. "We're escalating this to arson," one said grimly. "You're not safe here tonight." I refused to leave, though. I wasn't running from Karen, not after everything she'd done. But what I didn't know was that the fire wasn't the end. It was the distraction. The next morning, I discovered something far worse. The safe in my study, the one containing all my original property deeds and proof of ownership, was gone. The lock had been cut clean. I checked the security feed. 2 masked figures had entered through the back, moving quickly, precisely, in less than 3 minutes. My chest went cold. "She took the deeds," I whispered. "She's trying to erase my ownership." Denise arrived within an hour, stunned. "If she records a transfer with those," She could cause chaos, she said. We need immediate legal intervention. But the courthouse was closed for the weekend. We had to wait until Monday. Those 2 days felt endless. I stayed awake both nights, shotgun by my side, cameras humming softly, every creak in the house making my pulse quicken. On Sunday night, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating something outside, a shape by the fence. I aimed the flashlight and saw her, Karen, standing in the rain, unmoving, her face pale and furious. "You should have left," she said, voice barely audible over the storm. "Now it's too late. What did you do?" I shouted. She didn't answer. She just turned and walked into the darkness, headlights flickering to life moments later as her SUV disappeared down the road. I stood there for a long time, rain soaking through my clothes, a sick sense of dread churning inside me. By dawn, I knew this wasn't just about property anymore. This was about survival. Monday couldn't come fast enough. When it did, I drove to the courthouse with Denise, only to find out that something unthinkable had happened overnight. Someone had filed a new deed transfer for my land, showing it as community property under the Lakeside Estates HOA, the forged signature on the document. "Mine!" My head spun. "She did it," I muttered. "She actually did it." Denise slammed her hand on the counter. "We'll take this federal now. This is felony-level fraud." But before we could act, my phone buzzed, a call from the sheriff's office. "We've got a situation," the deputy said. "Karen's been found unconscious in her car near your property." "Looks like someone attacked her," I froze, the words echoing like a gunshot. For a moment, everything, the anger, the fear, the fight, blurred into confusion. "What do you mean attacked?" I asked, voice shaking. "She's alive," the deputy said, "but barely. Paramedics are on scene. We're going to need you to come down here." My heart pounded as I drove through the rain, headlights cutting through the fog. When I arrived, I saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off wet pavement. Karen's SUV sat off the road, one door open, windshield cracked, her clipboard and phone scattered in the mud. She was slumped in the driver's seat, blood on her forehead, murmuring incoherently. The deputy pulled me aside. "You're not a suspect," he said quickly, "but she kept saying your name, something about a file she left behind." I stared at her car, at the chaos, at the eerie silence that followed. Then the deputy handed me a small envelope they'd found in her passenger seat. My name was written on it in smudged ink. I tore it open, hands trembling. Inside was a single USB drive and a note. They made me do it. "The truth is on here." My vision blurred for a moment, my heart hammering as the realization hit me like lightning. Karen hadn't been working alone, but whoever was behind her had just tried to silence her. And whatever was on that USB could blow everything open. Rain drummed against the roof as I sat in my study staring at the USB drive, the tiny black rectangle that suddenly felt heavier than any weapon I'd ever held. Karen's shaky handwriting on the note kept flashing through my mind. They made me do it. "The truth is on here." My fingers trembled as I plugged it into the laptop. The screen flickered, a folder popped open, and there it was, a single file labeled Home Master Plan PDF. I clicked it, and the first page nearly stopped my heart. It wasn't just about me, it was an entire blueprint detailing how the HOA leadership had systematically expanded their control, parcel by parcel through forged boundary maps, manipulated zoning data, and bribed county insiders. Every signature, every name, every transfer date was listed in chronological order, spanning 6 years. Karen's name was on nearly every document, but below hers were others. County officials, lawyers, even the supervisor who happened to be her brother-in-law. And at the very bottom was a name that made my blood run cold. Councilman Richard Blaine, a high-ranking local politician. The files included photos of cash transactions, emails discussing expansion incentives, and recordings of meetings where Blaine's voice could clearly be heard saying, "Once we annex the last parcel, the land's ours for redevelopment." My 10 acres weren't just about HOA control. They were the final piece of a multi-million-dollar real estate scheme. Karen had been their puppet, their enforcer, the face of something far darker. I sat there, stunned, my mind spinning through every encounter, every threat. Karen's obsession hadn't been personal at first. It had been strategic. But somewhere along the way, she'd lost control, maybe even started to feel cornered by her own accomplices. The scratches on her car, the look of fear in her eyes before she collapsed, it all made sense now. She'd tried to expose them and they'd silenced her. My thoughts snapped back to the present. I copied the entire folder onto a backup drive and sent a duplicate to Denise with one sentence. If I disappear, release this to the press. Then I called the sheriff, explaining everything. He promised to send detectives, but I could hear hesitation in his voice. Blaine's influence ran deep in this county. Just stay put, he said. Don't do anything rash. But I knew staying put meant waiting for them to erase the evidence. Within hours, I started noticing movement again. Unmarked cars idling near my driveway, a drone hovering overhead, figures at the tree line pretending to jog. Fear tightened in my chest. I wasn't paranoid. They were watching me. That night, around 1 a.m., my security alarms went off. I checked the monitors. 3 figures, all masked, moving fast toward the back of the house. I grabbed the shotgun, heart pounding, and shouted through the window, "Leave now!" They froze, then scattered. I called the sheriff, but the line went dead halfway through the call. When I tried again, no signal. My power flickered, then went out completely. The only light came from the faint red glow of the laptop battery. I sat there in darkness, waiting. Every second stretched like an eternity until finally headlights flashed down the road. For a heartbeat, I thought it was them again, but it was Denise. She burst through the door soaked from rain, laptop in hand. "The drive you sent. It's bigger than we thought," she said, breathless. "It links to state funding accounts. Blaine's been laundering money through HOA fines. We need to move now." Together we drove to the nearest FBI field office, 20 miles away. The storm howled around us, thunder rolling like cannon fire. When we arrived, I handed the agent on duty both the USB and the backup drive. He skimmed through the files, his expression tightening by the second. "You did the right thing bringing this here," he said. "We've been following complaints about that HOA network for months." Within hours, they launched an emergency operation, subpoenas, warrants, digital traces. By dawn, Karen's brother-in-law and Councilman Blaine were both in custody. The county offices were raided, computers seized. I thought maybe, just maybe, it was finally over. But there was still one thing that gnawed at me. The envelope Karen had left also contained a smaller note I hadn't noticed before, folded behind the USB. It read, "If they find me, it won't matter what you do. They own everything." For days, the investigation consumed the town. News vans parked along the main road, reporters swarming the courthouse as details leaked. "Massive county corruption scandal tied to fake HOA documents," the headline screamed. My name was cleared publicly, my property ownership restored, and Karen, still recovering in the hospital, became the centerpiece of every broadcast. But the victory felt hollow. When I went to visit her, she was pale, frail, hooked to machines, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't understand," she murmured. "It's not just Blaine. There's another file. They have people higher up, outside the county." Her eyes darted toward the window as if someone might be listening. "Don't trust anyone from the council," she whispered. "They'll come for that land again. It's not about the HOA. It's what's under it." I wanted to ask more, but the nurse stepped in and Karen's breathing faltered. I never saw her alive again. 2 days later, she was found dead in her room, ruled a medical complication. But I knew better. The FBI knew it too. Her phone had been wiped clean before the coroner arrived. Weeks passed and the arrests kept coming. Every corrupt official connected to the scheme went down one by one. My property was declared sovereign again and the HOA disbanded under federal order. The county apologized publicly. People I'd never met before stopped by to thank me for standing up to the tyranny that had terrorized them for years. Yet peace never truly returned. Some nights, when the wind howled through the pines, I could still hear echoes of that first confrontation, the sharp clip of Karen's voice saying, "You can't live here." Only now I understood the layers beneath it. She wasn't just being petty. She was the mouthpiece of a machine built to consume. A month after the arrests, Denise called me with news that chilled me to the core. "You should see this," she said. She sent a photo, an aerial map of the county. My land was highlighted in red, but this time not by any HOA overlay. It was marked as a potential acquisition site by a private development firm called Eterna Holdings. The CEO? A shell company registered under a new alias for Blaine's business partner. They're regrouping, Denise said quietly. They'll try again under a different name. My pulse quickened. Then we'll fight again, I said. But she hesitated. It might not be that simple. The federal agents think there's something buried under your property. Old utility lines, maybe a decommissioned government structure. That's what they were after all along. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. I dug through old records, historical archives, even spoke to the county historian, an elderly man who'd lived there since the 1960s. What he told me made my skin crawl. Back during the Cold War, he said, this area had an underground communications relay, military grade, classified. When it was decommissioned, they buried the access tunnels. Nobody knows exactly where, but some believe it's under the North Field, my North Field. The one Karen always claimed was community land. Suddenly, everything made sense. The obsession, the fake maps, the bribery. They weren't fighting for HOA dues. They were fighting for whatever lay hidden beneath that soil. That night, I walked to the field under a pale moon. The grass was wet, the air thick with mist. I found the old utility marker half buried under moss and kicked it gently. It clanged hollow, a metallic echo. My heart raced. I fetched a shovel and started digging. 2 feet down, 3, then 4, the sound grew sharper. Finally, the metal surface emerged, a rusted hatch, sealed tight with faint letters barely legible through corrosion. U.S. Gov property, com access, 1968. My breath caught. I knelt there, staring, torn between fear and curiosity. Whatever was beneath had driven powerful people to commit crimes, to manipulate entire systems, even to kill. Should I open it or bury it forever? Before I could decide, headlights cut across the field. A black SUV rolled to a stop near the tree line. My gut twisted. I turned off my flashlight and crouched low. The engine idled and 2 men stepped out, suits, earpieces, silent and precise. They walked toward the hatch with purpose, flashlights sweeping the ground. One of them spoke quietly into a radio. We've located it. My heart pounded so hard I thought they'd hear it. I backed away slowly, retreating toward the house, and when I looked back again, they were gone. The hatch stood uncovered, a single red tag now attached to its handle. The next morning, the hatch had vanished, completely covered, reseeded with fresh dirt as if it had never existed. No tire marks, no trace of the SUV, just emptiness. When I asked the sheriff about it, he shook his head. You've been through a lot, he said softly. Maybe let it rest. But I couldn't. Denise confirmed that all public records referencing that military relay had disappeared from archives overnight. Someone had cleaned house at the federal level. I realized then that Karen hadn't been lying when she said, they own everything. Months later, when the dust finally settled, I rebuilt the porch, replaced the burned truck, and tried to reclaim normal life. But normal didn't exist anymore. The cameras stayed up, the floodlights stayed on, and the map, the real one, the legal one, hung framed on my wall as a reminder of how close I came to losing everything. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, I received an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a photo, my property, taken from the air, a small red X drawn over the north field. No note, no signature, just the mark. My hands went cold. I looked out the window at the fading light and whispered to the empty air, it's never over, is it? Somewhere, deep beneath that soil, secrets older and darker than any HOA feud still slept, and somewhere out there, someone wanted them awake. The wind rose, rattling the windows like distant knocks, and for a long time I stood listening, waiting, half expecting Karen's voice to cut through the dusk one last time, saying the words that started it all. You can't live here.